Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming to the August edition of Night with the Experts. It's sponsored by Nuclear Energy Information Service based in Chicago. At these sessions, we invite experts from around the country and sometimes even around the world to speak on various nuclear power, nuclear waste-related issues, also renewable energy issues, and give a brief presentation of things that are important in the news or in their world. And then we will switch at the very end to give you an opportunity to engage in some question and answer and discussion with our expert. Tonight, I'm really pleased to have an old friend and colleague, Tim Judson, be our guest speaker. He's currently the executive director at NIRS, the Nuclear Information Resource Service, formerly based in Tacoma Park. I guess it still might be, but I know folks are working from home quite a bit these days. But that's a suburb of Washington, D.C., so he has a lot of direct access at times to the folks in the Capitol. And Tim has been involved with the nuclear issues for many decades, been involved with other organizations in New York and New England, and currently occupies a pretty prominent status in the anti-nuclear movement and the movement for safe energy and a non-nuclear world. And most recently, galvanizing some of the efforts on nuclear is not a climate change. So you're in for a treat tonight, and without any more time, I'm just going to turn it over to Tim, and he will put up his slides and get into the topic for this evening. So Tim, welcome aboard. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, well, thanks, Dave, and thanks for the great introduction. And it's great to be here with NEIS, and was sort of, you know, honored to get the call to present tonight. I'm not sure that what I have to present is all that inspiring. I think we are, as you'll see in a few minutes. I think that we are at a real historical transition point, not just with, nuclear energy and the nuclear industry, but with the whole sort of, the whole regulation of nuclear energy in this country. And I'm going to probably get into a little bit some of the trajectory and the context of that statement. But I think, to kind of start from the reason why I think this conversation is important is because, the anti-nuclear movement has sort of, evolved, with the sort of the agency that regulates it. And I think that, we have as a movement, um, you know, essentially gotten very comfortable with the NRC as a regulator as much as we may dislike or distrust the NRC as a regulator. And I think that that relationship, has basically fundamentally changed now. The NRC is not the agency that we've become accustomed to. And we have reached a new sort of epoch in the way in which nuclear energy is regulated in this country, that may or may not have room for the public in it. And it probably doesn't. And so that's kind of what I'm going to sort of explain in terms of, the implications of the actions that the federal government has taken, both in the last, couple of months, but sort of, the way that sort of, culminates a process that's been going on for a few years. So I'm going to sort of queue up my slides and go from there. So I think what kind of occasioned this presentation is that there were a number of executive orders that the president issued on May 23rd, that really cue up what I just talked about, this fundamental change in the whole sort of regulatory context of nuclear energy in the U.S. But there's been several actions that have happened since then. This is clearly a moving process, and it doesn't just involve the executive orders, but everything that's happening subsequent to it and around it. But I'll start with that. And there. So first of all, just to level set the conversation. What is an executive order? Because the president is clearly stretching the boundaries of what executive orders can do. And the trouble is that While there's a lot that's in these executive orders that I think is, in violation of the law, is likely illegal, violates the Atomic Energy Act and other statutes. We clearly have a problem of, both of the other branches of government holding this administration accountable to the Constitution and the law. And so, what may happen as a result of that is really an open question. But officially, the president, one of the authorities of the presidency under Article 2 of the Constitution, which defines the presidency, is that they have to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. The trouble is we have a lot of laws, and sometimes they sort of push and pull the government and the law in different directions. And so executive orders are basically a way for the presidency to direct the federal agencies that they have authority over how to interpret the laws and the statutes, how to sort of essentially reconcile conflicts that might exist there, and how to prioritize and undertake their duties. So for instance, like we've become familiar with, basically federal agencies deciding how they're going to enforce the drug laws, which drugs are going to prioritize enforcing the laws on, and that sort of thing. And that can change from presidency to presidency. It's also happening with respect to other issues like immigration and whatnot. But there's things that the executive orders, officially cannot do. And they can't make up law. They can't supersede or contradict the laws, where there's existing statutes in place. They might be able to fill in gaps, what are federal agencies supposed to do when the law doesn't say what the law is. And they can't exercise powers. The presidents can't exercise powers, through executive orders that are not granted to the executive branch to execute. Now, that said, these four orders that were issued on May 23rd are very far-reaching. And they impact directly the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, but also other agencies that deal with nuclear matters. And they were issued in the order that you describe in this screen, which is the way they're listed on the White House website if you go there. But for whatever reason, that's the reverse order that they're documented in with their numbers that they're assigned. But they are the Executive Order 14302, reinvigorating the nuclear industrial base. Number 14301, reforming nuclear reactor testing at the Department of Energy. 14300, ordering the reform of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And 14299, deploying advanced nuclear reactor technologies for national security. Now, before I get into the details of all that, there's a number of other presidential actions that have happened since then that are also affecting how these orders are going to be implemented and essentially the whole context that we're operating in now. So first, essentially the Department of Energy has asserted some control over the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. We know this because there was a news report of a meeting that was held just literally a couple weeks after the executive orders were issued, that a Department of Government Efficiency staffer who was basically, a Department of Energy DOGE assignee was basically detailed to the NRC to oversee the implementation of the executive order reforming the NRC. And in that meeting, they told the NRC chair the Department of Energy and Department of Defense would approve stuff, and then NRC would be expected to just kind of rubber stamp it. And this has to do with essentially what the executive orders say about essentially licensing and regulation of new reactors. That the DOE and DOD in these executive orders are basically given the license or given the directive to begin building nuclear power plants outside of NRC licensing. And that the regulations and the regulatory decisions that DOE and DOD make about these new reactors, NRC would now basically be curtailed in terms of how much of a technical review they do of these things. There have also been some big changes at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission itself, the body of 3 appointed commissioners who make the ultimate decisions. So on June 14th, President Trump fired one of the democratically appointed commissioners, Christopher Hansen. That actually left the commission short-staffed with only 3 commissioners, 2 Republican commissioners and 1 Democrat. One of those vacancies was because the chairman David Wright's term had expired, and Trump had to decide what he was going to do about that. A couple days later, Trump reappointed David Wright as chair, which he was confirmed at the end of July. So that would put the commission up to 3-1. But in the interim, one of the other Republican commissioners, Annie Caputo, um, who had been serving as interim chair while Wright was going through reappointment. Um, when he was reappointed, she resigned her position, and there's been speculation that she did that because, and again, we'll see this in a minute, there are pro-nuclear people, pro-nuclear organizations that are concerned about the direction that the commission is going in under the Trump administration, and she resigned her position. Then a couple of days later, after that, President Trump announced the appointment of Ho Ni, who's been an executive at the Southern Company, which just built the Vogtle reactors in Georgia, but he had previously been an NRC staffer for a long time and had most recently been the director of the Office of Nuclear Reactor Regulation. Soon the commission will be up to ostensibly 4 commissioners, but will still be understaffed 1. Trump has not announced whether he's going to make an appointment for the fifth commission seat. But so we are in a position of change at the NRC where basically, a majority of the appointees of the commission are basically in alignment with Trump and his administration's agenda. So there's also, leading up to this, been a series of bills enacted on a bipartisan basis by Congress, essentially also sort of in various ways, demanding reforms of the NRC, basically, and most of them essentially expedited licensing of reactors is where the way a lot of this has been oriented. But starting in 2018, the Nuclear Energy Innovation Capabilities Act, which gave increased authorities to DOE to do testing of new reactor designs at its facilities. That was followed the next year by NEMA, the Nuclear Energy Innovation and Modernization Act, which basically told NRC to completely sort of update its licensing processes for these new types of reactors that haven't existed before. In the year, or as commercial reactors that haven't existed before, that are new types of technology that the NRC hasn't licensed before. Told NRC to basically come up with a new licensing process that would be what they called technology neutral by a certain date. And NRC has been in the process of creating that set of new licensing regulations, but now that has been completely upended by all the rest of this. Then in 2021, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, had a number of sort of funding provisions to advance nuclear energy, and also to subsidize existing reactors that were at risk of closure. That resulted in the continuation of the operation of the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant in California, as well as a couple of, about $3 billion in subsidies to new reactor projects. Then next year, the Inflation Reduction Act created a whole package of subsidies and financing from the federal government to promote nuclear power, as well as a bunch of other energy sources. But with the revisions that the Congress made to the IRA under President Trump's direction this year, most of the subsidies for renewable energy are phasing out, while the subsidies for nuclear energy and fossil fuels have been maintained. So that's pushing policy in that direction. Then in 2023, Congress, passed the Nuclear Fuel Security Act, which basically sort of reallocates some unused funding from the bipartisan bill to fund nuclear fuel production especially for new types of reactors. And then last year, the passage of the ADVANCE Act, which again, sort of put more demands on the NRC to expedite the licensing of new reactors, and actually sort of increase some of the staff at the NRC to do that, which now is basically sort of being pushed and pulled in different directions by what Trump is doing. But that's basically the context, is that on a bipartisan basis, Congress has been pushing the NRC to essentially be more compliant with the industry. And one of the important things that the ADVANCE Act did, which probably got the most attention, was that it directed the NRC to change its mission statement to not be solely focused on safety and security, but to include basically not getting in the way of the benefits of nuclear energy and to take the benefits of nuclear energy, the alleged benefits, into account in making its decisions and how it does its business. And then now that's something that the president's executive orders are very much keying into as well. So in the executive orders, just to kind of go through this as quickly as possible, the 14299 deploying advanced nuclear reactor technologies for national security. This executive order seeks to basically align nuclear power and artificial intelligence as national security priorities. So the designation of nuclear power reactors and artificial intelligence as a national security priority means that basically it gives federal agencies the authority or the power to do things outside of what the law would normally allow. And so that is also setting the stage for what's happening with the realignment of the NRC and reactor licensing. So it tells DOE to begin using nuclear reactors to power military bases and military operations starting in 3 years. It critically gives DOE the authority, tells DOE to start designating artificial intelligence data centers and their power supplies as, quote, critical defense facilities. That's an important federal term of art for basically, being able to do things that stretch the boundaries of the law. That's an emergency power. Tells DOE to create a fuel bank for new reactors to power DOE and AI facilities. Essentially a subsidy to their fuel supplies. And it directs DOE to utilize, quote, all available legal authorities to develop nuclear reactors and fuel infrastructure. So again, expanding this sort of emergency power that's being designated there. And then it directs the State Department in consultation or in cooperation with the DOE and other agencies to basically expand nuclear exports of nuclear reactors and nuclear technology to other countries. 14301, reforming the nuclear reactor testing at DOE, sets the stage for the DOE takeover of new reactor regulation. So it basically sort of tells says to the Secretary of the DOE to create a pilot program for reactor construction and operation outside the national laboratories, pursuant to the Atomic Energy Act, but to approve at least 3 reactors to begin operation by 2026 or in 2026. And then to use all available authorities to eliminate or expedite the department's environmental reviews for nuclear projects. So this is essentially, giving the DOE carte blanche to go outside of the National Environmental Protection Act and basically not have to do, detailed environmental reviews of new nuclear facilities. Then 14302, reinvigorating the nuclear industrial base, directs the Department of Energy to basically begin making plans and setting up the stage for an expansion of nuclear fuel infrastructure, including uranium enrichment, uranium conversion, nuclear reprocessing, consolidated interim storage of nuclear fuel, irradiated nuclear fuel, and related things. And it sets targets for essentially DOE to finance expansions of nuclear energy, including uprating existing reactors by a total of 5 gigawatts, within a few years, and a target of beginning construction on 10 new large reactors by 2030. So that is DOE directly being involved in the construction of 10 new large reactors within the next few years. That's coming back to 14300. So that sort of sets the stage for what's in here in terms of the reforms of the NRC. It sets a policy goal of quadrupling nuclear generation capacity by 2050 to 400 gigawatts. Now that's ironically still less than half of the goal that President Nixon set back in 1970 of 1,000 gigawatts by the year 2000. But it's still, it's still a significant. It's basically mandating alignment of these agencies and their efforts to that goal. It also directs sort of NRC to basically subjugate its licensing authority to the promotion of nuclear power. So in various ways, it basically, tells NRC to, that it shall comply with this mission statement directive that the Congress enacted last year in the Advance Act. It tells the NRC to reorganize its operations, or its, to promote the expeditious processing of license applications, basically speeding up licensing. And to basically also at the same time do staff reductions at the agency, undertake reductions in force. What that basically says is that like some operations at the NRC need to increase staffing, like licensing new reactors, but that means that other functions of the NRC are going to need to severely reduce staffing in order to make that possible. And then it also essentially subjugates one of the safety bodies at NRC, the Advisory Committee on Reactor Safeguards, which is a technical expert organization that an amendment to the Atomic Energy Act mandated back in 1957 to basically be an internal check on regulatory decisions by the NRC and licensing matters to basically provide an independent safety overview. And now they're saying that basically the ACRS's function is going to be minimized through this executive order. In terms of that, it has an agenda for regulatory changes at NRC, strict deadlines for the wholesale revision of all of the NRC's regulations within the next 9 to 18 months. So by February of this year, NRC is supposed to put out a draft set of all of its regulations revised for public comment. And then by November of next year to issue the final new rules and guidance for the entire agency. It also says that the NRC has to issue licensing decisions on an extremely expedited basis. So 12 months essentially for relicensing applications to extend, the license dates of existing reactors, and to approve new reactor license applications within 18 months. That's a very significant expedite order. It also tells NRC to basically revise its regulations on radiation standards, and says that the existing regulations are based on flawed science, which is absolutely not the case. NRC's regulatory standards on radiation are not up to speed with the existing science on radiation hazards. And yet this is saying that NRC basically needs to abandon those and go to a different set of standards that would be less stringent. And it tells NRC to establish an expedited pathway to approve reactor designs that the DoD and the DOE have tested. That's where essentially the DOE is going to have the authority to override the NRC's, basically regulatory authority. And then it has other regulatory changes, basically to revise the reactor oversight process, which is the inspection program and enforcement program for the safety of operating reactors, and to ensure basically that reactors, quote, safety assessments focus on credible, realistic risks. This is a coded term for basically loosening the regulations based on what they call probabilistic risk assessment. And then to streamline the process, the public hearings process, which is another, sort of coded word for basically curtailing the public's ability to get a hearing on a nuclear matter. So that's essentially, where we are at in terms of, the NRC as a regulatory agency. I expect that the sum total of all of this is that it's going to be much harder to get any real information out of NRC about your local reactor and about safety issues that are happening there. There's going to be fewer inspections and inspectors to even find those things out, and fewer NRC staff to essentially enforce those regulations, when they're violated. And then, by streamlining the public hearings process, it's also going to be much harder to get a hearing on a new reactor license application in your community. So, and we can start Q&A if you want, but I did include also some slides in here, which NEIS is free to distribute, providing historical context for essentially the way that we've gotten to this point from the beginning. And just what I'll say at the start is that, nuclear safety regulation has always been a compromised matter in the US. And that goes back to the formation of the Atomic Energy Commission right after World War II. And and these are quotes from a history of nuclear regulation that the NRC itself produced. And so, what you find in that document, and I'll provide that as well, are sort of, very clear sort of interpretations of, essentially what the mandates of the nuclear regulatory agencies were from the beginning. And that includes, for instance, the reasons why they created the Atomic Energy Commission and later the NRC, which was really about, sort of promoting an international, sort of foreign policy agenda for the U.S. to be perceived as the leader of nuclear energy worldwide. Um, but but in the ways that it's done that, there have been compromises along the way as well. So why don't we open it up for Q&A, and we can come back to some of this, in the context if that's helpful.
Okay, this is Bob Croteau. It's my first time doing this. Jan Budart, who normally does it, had an emergency to deal with, and so I just look for your patience in getting through the process here. Each person gets one question with a follow-up, and if you're making a comment or a long question, then and you don't need any feedback from the speaker, your comment may not be longer than 3 minutes. So I'll be trying to time that. Please don't ask a series of questions. Ask one at a turn. How to get in the stack? Raise your hand from the icon at the bottom of the screen. You do that in the React section where it says, it's got the heart and it says React. There's a raise your hand. There, the second one. And then, so in the chat, say stack. You will get a second chance to speak if it is not before second or half past the hour and no one else has their hand raised. So I'm having a little trouble with my screen too, and I'm hoping that that is not going to be a problem here. If I see that Connie Klein has raised her hand, so Connie, if you can unmute and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, thanks so much, Tim, as always. I do have a procedural question, but I'll save that, I guess, for later. But, I've asked this before in the context of these EOs. We conducted a series of meetings, I think it was last month. Are there any plans for lawsuits based on violating or well, I guess violating would be the word, the Atomic Energy Act or amendments to it, or because my opinion is that anything, excuse me, short of that will probably be ineffective. Because I'm such an optimist now.
No, it's a really good question, Connie. It's something I've been thinking about, since the day that the orders dropped. And I haven't heard of anybody planning, legal action at this point. I think it's one of those. I think it's also one of those questions where, like this is a moving target. We haven't seen a concrete, at least to my knowledge, we haven't seen a concrete action taken by the NRC yet, in response to the executive orders. And so, I think what may start to happen, right, is that, like, for instance, a couple of weeks ago, group in Texas filed a petition to intervene in a construction permit for one of these new reactors in Texas. Um, you know, uh, we'll see what happens, how the NRC decides on that petition. If they basically kick it aside without any good rationale for that, we may have we may have a cause there. But I think I think the concrete things that are in the executive orders are still a few months down the road. Um, you know, Putting out a whole set of new regulations, in February, to revise the entire 10 CFR code of regulations. That'll, I think, be one of the clear places where maybe there is, something in violation of the Atomic Energy Act or something. But I think the question as I've asked attorneys, like the question they have is just, well, what's happened yet? You have to have a cause to sue, and the executive order itself doesn't have any legal weight in terms of that stuff.
Thanks.
Bob, you're on mute.
Okay. Thank you, Connie. Craig Schultz is next. If you can unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you, Tim, for that presentation. It was not good news, but it's good that we have clarity on what's going on. It seems that everything that the government was involved in that was good and wholesome has been cut, and now it's there just to increase the velocity with which we rape and destroy all life on this planet. But given that environment, I'm just wondering if we as citizen environmental advocates shouldn't just go ahead and set up parallel systems of ourselves and just do what the government historically we were kind of lazy and relying on our government to do for us. I mean, other than the industry itself self-regulating, in our current state of fascism, the government's not going to do anything for us. I know it sounds pessimistic, but what I'm saying is the system's broken. It's doing exactly what the oligarchs want it to do, and that's to put more money and power in their pockets. And I guess I'm just wondering about, we need to set up parallel systems of governance, and we just need to do what needs to be done ourselves, because the government is not controlled by us anymore. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think there's the truth in what you're saying from my perspective is that no one's coming to save us, right? We have a bipartisan, consensus in Congress and in many states, to promote nuclear power right now. And I think there's some amount of pearl clutching going on, by people that have essentially staked their support for nuclear power on the notion that there is a credible regulator, that there's safety standards in place, that there's enforcement and whatnot. And I think that there is conflict, or at least conflicted feelings among people both in the industry and in government, about the steps that are being taken. But I think the damage is going to have long been done, before there's any sort of, kind of reconciliation on that. And so I think that, even if, for instance, the majority swings in Congress, in 2020, in the 2026 election, and Democrats are back, they're not going to be able to get much done because Trump's still in the White House, and the Republican would probably still be Senate. I mean, the Senate would probably still be Republicans. And so this erosion that's happening, the attrition of staff at the NRC, right? Like, no one is going to be coming back to those jobs anytime soon. And the people that are left at the NRC, the first people that are getting weeded out in this process at the NRC are the people who would, who might be whistleblowers. And so the people that are going to be left at the NRC, are people that are basically, going to be going along. And so I think that, yeah, there isn't anyone coming to sort of right the ship anytime soon. And I think, and I think this is true not just for us with our set of concerns about nuclear energy, but with the environment and lots of other issues more broadly, climate as well. And so I think we are all in a moment of having to find different ways to be effective in protecting our communities, protecting the environment, protecting our families. And so I think I think we need to really sort of, think through and come up with, come up with ways of being effective activists and advocates and organizers, without being able to rely on, getting a hearing at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Right. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Craig. David, you are next in line.
All right, I will go. I was going to defer to the others, but I want to interject some possibility here. As bad as all of this looks, I know we at NEIS have been looking into ways of actually utilizing what they've already put into play against them. And I would invite the people who are participating in the Zoom session tonight to put some thought into that and maybe share some ideas you have, since many of you are people in the trenches fighting these fights. But, I do see some opportunities here as well that may not have been there before, simply because these are so outrageous that I think we have an opportunity to look like rational people to the world, and instead of the fringe people that we have been characterized as for so many decades. So I'd like you to share, if you have any, Tim, thoughts on areas of intervention specifically that we can do, which is where you left off a minute ago and what
Sure.
you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there are, I mean, there's been a lot of, promotion of nuclear energy that has essentially, sort of hitched itself to the notion that the NRC is a world-class regulator. And the fact of what's happening right now means that basically there's people that are that's not a credible positioning. And so, I think to your point, Dave, where you have, state policies, like nuclear subsidies and bailouts that are predicated upon, there being, essentially the reactors being safe and whatnot. There's going to be ways to push back on that. And then just in terms of public relations and, and messaging and whatnot, there's real reason to be concerned, because as we know, and, this is something that, Dave, you raised right, after the executive orders were issued. One of the main findings of the sort of the analysis of the root causes of the Fukushima disaster in 2011 was, not that there was an earthquake, which obviously was the precipitating event, but that there was not an independent regulator in Japan. That the regulatory agency in Japan had been subject to basically corporations and political officials and their priorities, and had avoided requiring, putting a higher seawall in front of Fukushima, years before the accident happened, on the basis that it would have been too much of a financial burden to require it. And we are, fully in that same sort of environment now with the NRC. I mean, I think a lot of us believed that was the case, that NRC was a captured regulator before. But I think, now, with what's happening, it's obvious to most people that that's the case, and there's real reason to be concerned. So I think I think it does provide a way to push back on some of the conditional support that nuclear has gotten, from both certain elected officials, but also in policies, like, for instance, the nuclear bailout program in New York and whatnot.
Thanks, Tim.
Okay. Stephen, you are next. Go ahead and unmute and go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Stephen Sondheim. A lot of you all know me. I'm in the Sierra Club. I live in Chicago. This is all very depressing. Tim, you haven't depressed me. I've already been depressed about all of this. And I guess my question, and we started to talk a little bit about it, is what can be done? What can we do? And I mean, I'm thinking of things like holding it up where possible. Certainly locals who don't want the expense the danger, the time it takes. And, you know, there's a lot of legal things, but it's very discouraging because they just gloss right over it.
Sure.
And, you know, some of the plants that are being considered redone already have bad problems.
Mhm.
So what can we do? It's very discouraging. Oh, and the other one thing I want to mention is, it's a question, but also renewable, even though it's being held back a lot, is making great strides. And perhaps the person who said we need to proceed with the good stuff, we do need to do that. Renewable efficiency, it's a better mousetrap. It's cheaper, it's better. Okay. Tim, do you have anything to say about what the hell
Yeah,
could
Stephen,
we do?
I mean,
Okay.
I knew that I wasn't going to be giving a rosy, picture tonight, and I feel like that would have been irresponsible. But I do want to remind everybody that, you know, we have had great successes, as activists, as a movement, outside of what the government regulations do. And I think just as a for instance, I think if you look through the list of reactors that, that have been closed over the last, 30, 40 years, and reactors that have been stopped, almost all of that has been despite what the NRC was doing. And in fact, when Citizens Awareness Network, began organizing and strategizing the campaign to close the Vermont Yankee reactor, back, this is, almost, 18 years ago now. We decided that we were not going to rely upon the NRC. We were assuming the NRC was going to grant the license extension to Vermont Yankee. And we built a campaign, based on grassroots organizing, based on leveraging, the power of the state government and whatnot to stop that reactor. And at every point along the road with NRC and, and even challenging NRC decisions in the courts, Entergy won and, and got the decisions that it needed. We closed that reactor anyway, because in the process of all of that campaigning and organizing, we made it impossible for Entergy to find a customer for its power, and it had to shut the plant. And so, then there's numerous other examples of how, we've, won campaigns, to stop reactors, stop radioactive waste dumps, to close them down, without having to get a win from the NRC. I think one of the things that's potentially going to be more challenging now is this linkage of nuclear power to basically a national security priority. And, we've navigated that too in the past, after 9/11, raising security concerns about the vulnerability of reactors to terrorist attacks. And we found ways to work in politically complicated environments like this. So I just think that, we need to, but we are going to need to, to find different ways of working.
Thank you. Well, if I can follow, I don't know if I'm, whoops. If I can follow, I don't know if I'm still here, but I don't understand how they're seeing nuclear energy as a national security issue. Energy is a national security issue, but not particularly nuclear energy. Is there some way to take that apart?
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I think that the reason that they're doing it, Stephen, isn't because it is a national security priority. It's as much of a vulnerability as anything, as we've seen through the war in Ukraine. Um, but it's a way of basically shutting the public out and creating legal loopholes for things to happen that we could otherwise challenge legally. And so that's where I think the whole reason to do it is to basically create, sort of a legal wormhole, to push as much stuff as they can through
Mm-hmm.
to foreclose
Challenge it.
democracies.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm unmuted. I don't have a name here for the next one. I just have a phone number ending in 6157.
Hi.
Maybe you can say who
Hi,
you are.
Jake is my name. Thank you for your talk. My question is, do the deregulations coming from the Trump administration preclude state and local regulations, such as on the local level of zoning? For example, if a electric utility wants to set up a nuclear power plant in a residential neighborhood, they probably have to rezone it industrial. You hear what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, yeah, that goes to what I was saying about the Vermont Yankee campaign as well, is that, we still live in a federalized system. And so state and local governments may still have authorities that can be used. And in fact, to that exact point, there's news just in the last couple of weeks that Holtec might be giving up on the consolidated interim storage facility that it got a license for in New Mexico. And not be and then the courts ruled in Entergy's favor, or Holtec's favor, to basically to defeat the legal challenges that people had filed to those licenses. But because of the laws that New Mexico had passed that basically attacked other aspects and other types of permits and approvals that they would have needed, that they don't see a viable way to actually build that nuclear waste storage site. So I think that, yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing that we need to be looking to is other other laws and regulations that can be used, to get better outcomes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you then. Next up
And,
is
and by the way,
Jacqueline.
also that's why I think a lot of the executive orders focus on getting DOE and DOD to build reactors on federal land. And I think that's where there may be more trouble, in fighting some of these new reactor projects, is because they will be built on land that is essentially exempt or from state regulation and authority.
Huh.
Okay. Jacqueline, you are next. Go ahead and unmute.
This is thank you so much, Tim, for being so explicit about everything. It really helps my mind to wrap around some of this. I just had two thoughts here, or maybe you can address it. And you kind of did with Stephen Sondheim, but so my feeling is that the Trump administration is making nuclear energy production to be a national emergency, which would allow them to move full steam ahead. But there is no actual national emergency. So is that one way to push back? And
Well, yes and no. And I see where you're going, Jackie.
Mhm.
The trouble is that one of the executive orders Trump issued on the first day of his administration was to declare a national energy emergency. And so so that has provided a platform for a number of other things that he's doing in the energy space. And so they've also declared that that artificial intelligence is a national security
Right,
priority and
right.
is a national emergency. And because they see essentially the race to develop AI as the next essentially nuclear weapons race. And
Okay.
so anything that would stand in the way or inhibit the US from winning that fight or winning that race, is potentially falls under this national energy emergency declaration and other things that are sort of
So he
making
did make a declaration about energy emergency.
national energy
Okay.
emergency was day one. Yes.
Okay. So the
And, and,
other
and it
part.
specifically named uranium as a domestic energy source that was a national priority for the energy.
Wow. Wow,
Yeah.
that is so horrible. The other part of what I kind of wanted to get at, which was more in your beginning, was are you hearing or have you heard through the grapevine any of the undercurrents at the NRC that as they're being forced to be at the behest of this administration and Doge? Are you hearing any pushback, anything?
I mean, only sort of second or third hand, and I think that this is a question of like, is someone going to, whether it's be brave or, um, you know, otherwise enough, to file a whistleblower case or to come forward and make allegations. The trouble is that being a whistleblower is I mean is a really difficult life decision, And a lot of people that are losing their jobs at NRC are still working in the nuclear. They still, work in the nuclear industry. And so they don't want to get blacklisted from the industry as a whole necessarily by, essentially taking on a David and Goliath struggle against the doging of NRC. So I think, again, it's going to really depend on, whether someone who's, involved in the changes at NRC is going to feel strongly enough about it that they would feel compelled to come forward and do something. And, that's, I think, we need to be prepared to support people who make those allegations. But it's going to be a really tough road to hoe for them.
Well, thank you very much for your insight on that. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Dave Lockbaum, you are next on the agenda here.
Thank you. I have a comment rather than a question, and it speaks to the discussion that Tim just had about whistleblowers. Many of the executive orders and the legislation is going to make it more difficult for nuclear plant workers and NRC staffers to raise issues because it puts a target on the back, and there's been too many sacrifices on the nuclear altar. I think there's a silver lining in this very, very dark cloud, and that those people of conscience, whether nuclear plant workers or NRC staffers, who are seeing the door shut to raising safety issues internally, will turn outside. Many of them, not all of them, many of them will turn outside. The 17 years I worked for the Union of Concerned Scientists, I received more concerns from NRC staffers than the industry combined. And to Jacqueline's just point, last week I was contacted by an NRC staffer. It said that there's pressure to do away with the NRC's risk assessment handbook that they use to judge the industry's risk assessments. Ho Ni, who Tim mentioned is now on the commission, when he worked for the NRC, was a proponent of getting rid of that and letting the industry police themselves on the risk assessments. There are many people in the NRC that don't want to see that happen. It's important, as Tim suggested, that there be a conduit for people who have those concerns to get them out. At UCS, I would take those concerns, protect the person's identity the best I could, and fend it off to either Congress or the media to put a spotlight on that nefarious activity, which didn't stop it, but it did curb some of the more nefarious of those activities. So keep that in mind, that give those people a conduit to get their concerns out and still protect their jobs. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that, Dave.
Thank you, Dave. Next up is Mr. Rosenstein. Please enter the conversation.
Okay, I have a question. This is my question. What can be done, do you think, to convince the American public that nuclear fission is not a member of the renewable energy portfolio? But also, I would say in that context, controlled nuclear fusion is. And what is your perspective on continuing our research and development on controlled nuclear fusion? We're getting more insights from both a theoretical effort and practical means from different approaches to controlled nuclear fusion. I do think that we make a serious mistake by just labeling nuclear energy and not distinguishing between nuclear fission, and which is the environmental plaguing one, and controlled nuclear fusion, which holds out great hopes for meeting the world's energy supply. So I'd like to hear your comments on those specific issues.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think in terms of the educating the public, I think that's the same. I don't necessarily think that has changed, and and it may have actually gotten easier, to Dave Kraft's points. That the sort of the curtain's been lifted on a lot of the dangers of nuclear energy that people might perceive, because we can't rely on there being a strong regulator. But I think that the industry has put out a massive amount of resources, into public relations and miseducating the public about nuclear energy over the last decade, especially. And so I think we had a big job to do, to educate the public and to educate the movement, before any of this happened. And I think that's still the same job. I think that my sense is that, a lot of people, whether they think nuclear is renewable or not, that's sort of a definitional thing. I think this perception that nuclear is necessary, to avert the climate crisis, and is, and is not dangerous, and the radiation isn't a hazard. I think those are issues where there really does need to be some mass education, that only we can start as a movement.
I do think you have to make a distinction in the public mind between controlled nuclear fusion and nuclear fission. There certainly are some radiation problems with controlled nuclear fusion, but I think they can be contained.
I think it's certainly true, and I think that most people, it's but what I get is okay, I don't like nuclear power, but what about nuclear fusion? And I think that there's we're very far from nuclear fusion being a reality, and so the idea that we shouldn't be solving the climate crisis with with the renewable energy sources and other technologies that are available now, is just something that is practical for for the fact that we need to save the climate because things are getting people are already in danger. In terms of fusion as a technology, I'm not sure that it's all that it's cracked up to be, and it may not. You may not have the danger of a catastrophic meltdown disaster like we experience with fission reactors. But I think there's a lot of environmental problems, with fusion, were it to become a viable industry. And so, but I think I would like to not get into details about that now, for the sake of getting to the other questions, but I'm happy to have that conversation at some point, when there's time.
Yeah, I do think that has to be investigated very carefully. It's not a panacea, but it's something we can't turn our backs on either.
Okay. Well, thank you. We next have Carolyn Kroom. You can take the handle.
Okay. Hi. I live in Texas and I'm active in the Texas Nuclear Watchdogs group. I think because you've been in on some of these meetings.
Yeah, hi, Caroline.
And hi. And you had mentioned that Holtec might give up consolidated interim storage in New Mexico because of some of the permits required. And I know the state of Texas, through the Texas, through our TCEQ, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, has some permit requirements for groundwater, for wells and stuff. And this this would be the waste control specialists, interim storage partners, potential site in West Texas for the high level radioactive waste.
Yeah, and the situation may
So
well
I,
be similar with WCS as to Holtec, given the laws that y'all got passed, basically making it, under state law illegal to create a CIS facility in Texas.
yes, so and I know that WCS, ISP, or whatever you want to call it, is looking to sell. And I don't know if it has to do with these, these state laws or not, but I was wondering if you had any perspective on what's going on in Texas.
I don't at this point. I mean, the news that WCS might sell, it was taken over by a private equity firm a few years ago. So, private equity firms don't want to hold on to companies for a long time. And so, there may be, I haven't seen enough information yet to kind of get a clear take on what's going on with, whether it's, the CIS proposal for under WCS and ISP, or, WCS as a company. But I think it is possible that the CIS facility proposal is going to go away in Texas as well. But, we just don't know yet.
Okay, well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Carolyn. We have Connie Klein again in line. Please take the handle here.
Thanks again. One quick comment. Paul Gunter has said that a whistleblower, he hasn't given any details at all, but a whistleblower did approach Beyond Nuclear. So this is something we really have to encourage and protect these people, as Dave Lackbaum said. Dave Kraft, can you put in the chat the link to the recording? Can you put it in there again? And Tim, how do we go about getting the slides?
Oh, I'm gonna send them to Dave Kraft, and I'm sure that NEIS will get them posted on their website. Or, whatever you want to do, Dave, but I'm happy to share them that way.
Yeah, before I get into more detail on that, I just want to see if there are other people who want to either offer suggestions on how we can creatively confront this, or get into discussion with one another of what specifics can we do. And then I'll come back to that a little bit when we do the wrap up at the end, how people can get the information that's available. So again, you're invited to raise your hand and weigh in. And if not, Tim, you can certainly have the last word. Oh, Bob has a question. And then Craig, good. Go for it, Bob.
Okay, it seems to me, how do we address this new reality? And I think it can be one simply on the economics, how much more affordable renewables with battery storage is versus nuclear, which is never what they tell it's going to be. It's always double or more. And so I think if we can pound down on that one, I think there's a lot more traction than, well, it's just, going to
Yeah,
be
I think
inevitable.
that's true, Bob. I think that it's more complicated. I mean, with everything that the Trump administration is doing to basically crack down on renewable energy, like there's states that have already, I mean, they've got construction underway on offshore wind projects that they just yanked the permits for federally. So, obviously there's probably going to be legal challenges. We'll see if that happens. But I think one of the things that's happening at the same time, that we're getting these actions from the Trump administration is, states have really been trying to, there's a lot of states that have been trying to, to put into policy, put into practice, targets to reduce emissions, to move away from fossil fuels. And, yes, nuclear power is not a good solution for that, and it's also got its own problems. But I think that there's, the question is really how many obstacles are they going to be successful at throwing up to renewable energy, to be able to continue basically making it, a viable option to both phase out fossil fuels and and prevent more nuclear. The other thing that's happening is that, and this is in concert with this, is they're ending the federal subsidies for renewable energy as we speak. Nuclear energy still has all the subsidies they enacted a couple of years ago. And what that means is that under the IRA, nuclear projects could be eligible for 50% of their costs getting covered by tax subs, by tax breaks. So, if you look at like Plant Vogtle, right? Like, everyone knows what a disaster that project was, $23 billion over budget. But if the tax, but it was, then that reactor project was $14 billion when it was proposed to be built. If half the cost of the project had been covered by tax credits in the end, then it would have ended up only costing 17 or $18 billion. Now, that doesn't seem like such a bad deal to a lot of states right now. So the economics of nuclear are different now. And in terms of a lot of the reactor projects that are ordered by these executive orders, like those projects may be entirely paid for by the federal government. Like these 10 new reactors for the DOE to start construction on by 2030. That's probably going to be reactors that are going to get full financing under loan guarantees by the federal government. And then they're going to be able to hide the energy costs by having the DOE buy the energy and feed it to data centers. So I just think that like there's some of this that may move forward, you know, based on, you know, basically no economic, you know, sort of, you know, hurdles at all to the industry. I think the question that I have is how much of this stuff are they going to actually be able to do? Because there's so much here. They're trying to move so fast with while cutting agencies' staff and reducing their capacity to do anything. You know, I think there's just a real struggle as to what they're actually going to be able to accomplish. You know, while they're trying to basically do everything they can while cutting the government. That's, I think, you know, so I think there's lots of obstacles and there's, you know, and then there's lots of things that are going to be harder for us to challenge. But I think, but your thinking is right that, you know, we can't lose the thread that, you know, renewable energy is faster and more affordable and cleaner and safer than these things that the Trump administration is trying to push on us.
Well, if they're taxes, then we're paying for that nuclear anyway. And so, you
Yeah.
know, so thank you.
But you know, but I think but what that boils down to, right, is that like, you know, in Georgia, people's utility rates just went up by 24% because of these $38 billion reactors, $37 billion reactors. You know, that cost spread across the entire country, you know, the taxpayers, it would be a lot less of a hit on households than what Georgians are experiencing. And so I think what they're counting on is sort of the frog in the pot syndrome, where, you know, each of these projects is only going to hit us in the pocketbook a little bit. And if they get, you know, and only if they get far enough will it actually be something that people will notice, you know, as something that they could complain about.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we have some repeat questions. Craig, you want to take up another one here?
Yeah, so as far as addressing the issue, I guess I want to encourage this group to be thinking deeper than just this administration. We have to remember that the nuclear unilateral bipartisan thrust of all of our government agencies under the Democratic, the IRA, was getting this whole ball rolling. Now it's being thrown into chaos by cutting staff and the executive orders, FEMA being cut. It's almost inevitable. I mean, the supposed safety and depth, you know, of the way that the NRC was running before was just barely adequate, you know, and it's almost inevitable that we're going to have, on top of, you know, chaos, we're going to have a nuclear disaster. So the encouragement that I want to what I'm posing to this group is we need to think about changing the mindset or the narrative from pro-Republican or pro-Democrat, or it's like my side's right, or both sides were leading us eventually to where we're getting. One side was getting us there quicker than the other. But what if maybe perhaps if we can reframe our thinking into being if there's got to be two sides, that there's the pro-ecological health side versus, so who amongst us, even the most far right or far left, whoever, would be anti-health, ecological health? Who wants to destroy the planet? So perhaps that's a stronger framing or position to take, and to be thinking about how we can align ourselves with all of the organizations, because literally there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of organizations that are working for environmental health and for you know, social justice and for all these good things. But we're so fragmented and we all have our own little niche. And we're like staying in our like, well, we're anti-nuclear and we don't get along with the people who are anti, you know, slightly not nuclear or whatever. And it's like, we all do have a common agenda. And that's what I'm proposing, is that we need to expand our mindset to think about how we can be united instead of how we're fighting or not being united in our efforts to try to save ecological health.
Yeah, you're here.
That's true. Thank you, Craig. Alfred, you're up next.
Great. Yeah, to follow on that, I wish I knew exactly how to stop this, but I think that one important thing to, it's my opinion, that the entire purpose of the nuclear enterprise is to provide nuclear weapons and the nuclear navy with which to deliver them. And we are feeling very much behind in the international race with China and Russia. And so we are seeing this huge explosion of priming the nuclear pump in this country to develop the academic, industrial, governmental, regulatory infrastructure needed for these new nuclear weapons. And the small modular reactors are not for Kansas, they're for new submarines and for aircraft carriers. And because it's being driven by this national security imperative, Ernie Moniz describes civilian nuclear power, and I quote, an essential enabler. Think of those two words together, essential enabler of national security. And it's not that they're making bombs down at the local nuclear reactor, but it's the whole vast industrial infrastructure needed and specialized all sorts of things that basically civilian nuclear power doubles the market size. But it's in support of the military. And if we don't address that military prerogative, all the very valid, important, and critical arguments about waste, health, cost, timeliness, all those arguments which are totally true, don't hold up to anything because national security trumps everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred. Yes, Jake, you're next.
Hi. Yeah, thank you again. My question is the issue of artificial intelligence was brought up. Artificial intelligence uses up gobs of electricity, so I think they're hoping that Trump administration has made it priority. I guess my question is the Trump administration and the industries who are promoting artificial intelligence, are they overestimating the market? How much is this stuff going to cost, and who's going to buy it? You know, it sounds wonderful, artificial intelligence, but who's going to buy an artificial intelligence system if it's too expensive? And I mention that because in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, Commonwealth Edison overestimated the amount of power. They built up the nuclear power industry in this state because in large part because they overestimated the market. And so, my question is: are they overestimating the market for artificial intelligence? And in so being, are they overestimating the market for electricity itself? You hear what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And they may very well be doing that. I think, and the reckoning on that may come sooner rather than later. I think that I think the sense of, sort of urgency about the development of AI, is sort of dominating the, politics and the policy around all of it. So I think that, but I think there's also a movement, opposing this massive expansion of data centers that's gobbling up water and power and land and, and communities. That's also, I think, really important for us to be, in conversation with, because those, and the linkage of nuclear to that development, which is itself unsustainable, is where we have a lot of friends, whether we haven't met them or not.
I just have to make a quick comment that my son has a computer, runs a lot of those games, and it alone heats up his bedroom to where, we have to try and run air conditioning for him. So he has to leave his window open. But okay, thank you. Michelle, it's your turn next. Thank you.
Yeah, I just put a couple of things in the chat. Yeah, I think a lot of what's happening is a huge race for federal money, and there is going to be a built-in limitation for that. I definitely do believe the economics argument at this point for the American people is the most persuasive, but it has to go beyond the narrow framing of just, oh, renewables are cheaper and blah, 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 because as Tim said, that is right now very different. But we're having federal cuts across the board at the state level, and even with framing things to other environmental groups and other people. Right now, the money going to nuclear, whether it's from the federal taxpayer or the state taxpayer or ratepayers, is going to be, taking money away. This is not going to be a win-win. It's going to be win-lose. The question: do people want schools? Do people want health care? Do people want, bridges repaired? Do people want, that's really what this is being pitted against now, not just renewables and efficiency in buildings. So I just wanted to get people think a little bit outside the box there. And I would just say that often with people who come into these discussions because they've been so propagandized by media and the tech bros excitement and so forth. Sometimes you can't start in a direct way arguing. You have to go through the side and just sort of get them to think a little bit rather than just say, no, renewables is so great and it's better. They shut down.
Yep. Yep. Just to ask them what this is all going to cost. I think running on money is the big question. That's what they relate to the most. Thank you, Michelle. Bob, I think you're up for another question now.
Yeah, I just have a quick question concerning the Russian war on Ukraine, whether we could expect to see serious damage of the nuclear fission power plant in the Ukraine, which could be structurally analogous to what happened at Chernobyl. Would the Russians possibly deliberately target the plant or accidentally target the plant so that we get a deluge of radioactivity over Western Europe?
Yeah, that's been a danger, a very explicit danger since the very early days of the war and Russia's invasion. They've routinely, both attacked the infrastructure around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. They've, the military occupation, the Russian military takeover and occupation of the plant has posed really significant, risks of an accident or disaster. I think but I think in the overall picture, what it's made clear is that, the nuclear reactors are inherently vulnerable in military conflicts, and they can be weaponized very easily. And it's only a question of whether, and this is the same issue that came up, after the 2011, terrorist attack, in the U.S., or 2001 terrorist attack in the U.S., that whether, essentially the risk is worth it. Because, obviously nuclear disasters have far-reaching implications, both environmentally, and politically and militarily. And so, it's really a question of, but I think, and this has also become true with the U.S. bombing of the Iranian nuclear facilities, the routinization of making nuclear facilities, civilian nuclear facilities, military targets and potential military targets, is upon us. And and nothing has been able to prevent that from continuing in Ukraine for the last 3 years.
What about perlotting of the nuclear fission waste products to manufacture fission bombs? Is that still a global reality factor, not just state?
Sorry, Bob, your sound is a little muffled. I couldn't quite hear your question.
What about the possible perlotting of the nuclear fission waste globally in order to manufacture nuclear fission bombs?
Yeah, I mean, clearly the theft of irradiated fuel, and we're processing that for, for nuclear weapons material is possible. The nuclear fuel itself can be weaponized, and we've known that, for over 20 years now as well. It's potentially even a bigger danger in terms of environmental impact than than a reactor meltdown would be. But again, it's just, there is it sort of just expands the potential scenarios in which, nuclear energy facilities can be weaponized like that.
Dave, you want to let Alfred do, or do you want to jump in now?
Alfred, go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, my suggestion for consideration about a line of reasoning is what sticks in my craw. One of the things that sticks in my craw is, why should taxpayers and ratepayers pay for a private industry's energy needs? Why, for Ford Motor Company, we don't build them power plants so they can make cars.
Well, we
So
do, but
well, but for cryptocurrency and data centers, I mean, what's this presumption that this is a public good? I mean, I call this nuclear socialism, where
yeah. And this point is really, yeah. I mean, I think that this gets into, again, this sort of widening sort of like, sort of scope of what's considered a national security priority. Like, for instance, we passed this, this Chips and Science Act also a few years ago to prioritize reshoring, microchip manufacturing in the U.S. One of the biggest of the projects coming out of that program is being proposed in Syracuse right now, where they want to build a microchip plant to build microchips. The facility, this plant itself, if it built out to its full scope, would consume as much electricity as Vermont and New Hampshire together. I mean, it's a scale of power consumption for one manufacturing plant that dwarfs anything that you ever heard of before. But AI data centers are getting to be on the same scale as even that, with some of the huge gigawatt scale, data centers that they're talking about building. But I think that it goes to this is exactly the question that's coming up for people in New York right now, is like, why are we going to pay the bill, to power this, this microchip plant when it's getting $25 billion in state and federal subsidies already?
private corporation, we're paying, taxpayer money. This is nuclear socialism. The taxpayers support it, but the profit goes to the private companies. And I'll just, I was on a webinar today about Lockheed Martin and nuclear reactors in space. And they were all excited because they were talking about, we're at this special nuclear moment that we finally gotten enough of the important ingredients together that we're going to go for it this time. And that's what I see, is that there's this monumental push to make nuclear be inevitable. Are they going to build SMRs in every block? No, they hardly build any of them. They'll build enough for the Navy, but it has to look like they're coming to every neighbor.
Yeah. The inevitability, I think, is definitely their big political move right now.
Thank you, Alfred. David, what do you know?
Well, first, let me see if anyone else has any other questions or comments they want to make, and then I could really just run down the list of wrap-ups, because we're approaching the hour-and-a-half mark. So anyone else? Okay, Jackie has one. Go ahead.
Well, I just love what Alfred just said, because we all know that the costs for this are just so excessive, and the liability, it's just outrageous. But boy, kind of turning this around and using this term that he just mentioned, nuclear socialism, might really kind of change some people's thoughts about what's going on. I think that's a great way of describing what's happening.
You're welcome to use the term, Jackie.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Last call. All right, before I move on, I want to thank Bob Croteau for subbing in for Jan Budart tonight. You did a great job, Bob. And I also want the group to know that Bob has recently taken under consideration the fact that he may become our next NEIS board president. So congratulations to you, Bob, and thank you as well. So thanks for your helping tonight. Okay, I just want to pick up on that last thread between Tim and Bob and the comment that Michelle put into the chat. It's as much a comment, and if you want to ring in on it too, that's fine. I find it particularly useful to talk about the microreactors and the so-called small modular reactors in the context of not just national, but international security. And I've mentioned this in a few other venues before, that when we described to certain experts, military experts, the idea of throwing microreactors on flatbed trucks and train cars and moving them all over the country, they went crazy. They said, sorry, motorcycle went by here. They said there is absolutely no way of guaranteeing national security under those circumstances. I can provide links to a radio show where we have that. And I also put together a series of slides in our small modular PowerPoint, which show the destructive impacts of shoulder-held munitions in Ukraine and elsewhere, and ask the not so rhetorical question of where exactly would you put a small modular in Mariupol? So anyway, if people would like those slides, we're happy to send them on to you. So I'm going to get down to some housekeeping and some announcements, and then we'll do a wrap up here. On the more positive things, what can we do? I just want to remind people that Bill McKibben hasn't exactly been asleep at the wheel, and he is organizing a national day called Sunday, Sun-Day, on Sunday, September 21st, around the country to showcase the positive aspects of solar energy. NEIS is going to be having an information table at the Chicago event, but I encourage you folks to seek out venues close to you, and I put the link in the chat where you can reach the Sunday campaign and perhaps get your own information table and talk about why nuclear is not a climate solution and why solar energy is. So that is one piece coming up. The other is on the what you can do front. In the next day or so, this Night with the Experts will be posted to YouTube. And one thing NEIS has gotten in the habit of doing is sending the link to the YouTube event plus the chat to our reporters list and our state and federal legislative lists with a little note of saying, sorry you missed us, but this is something you really ought to take a look at. So when that link becomes available, we'll send it out to you, and we encourage you to do the same in your states. Send it around, and then folks can hear Tim's talk, and we would also, I guess, make available the slides if you make them available, Tim. So that's something we can definitely do now, and we'll get that link out to you as soon as it's available. A little closer to home, we are organizing in Illinois a postcard campaign to Governor J.B. Pritzker. He's been stellar on a number of issues lately. I'm sure you've seen him on TV and elsewhere. But unfortunately, on the nuclear power issue, he wants to open Illinois up to more nuclear plants. So we are initiating a postcard campaign largely based on a lot of the things Tim said tonight about how can you talk about having more nuclear in the most nuclear state in the country when you're cutting the safety net and reducing the staff by 50%. That's a kind of messaging piece that I think other folks in the trenches, and especially in states that have moratoriums that are threatened, can use. So we encourage you to do that as well. So we'll have the postcards available if people want to send them out, and you can model them and reformulate them to your particular location. So finally, next month, I will be doing the Night with the Experts because it's the session before our state legislature begins again, and the topic will be not repealing state moratoriums. So if folks are interested in that, you can weigh in on it. Let's see, it would be on September 25th. That's the fourth Tuesday of September. So tonight's event, as I said, it'll be posted to YouTube soon. All of you will get a copy of the chat tonight. So there are a lot of links in there that you can make use of. And certainly some requests if you want stuff before we sign off tonight. put your request in the chat with your email address and we'll get it out to you. So on that note, Tim, thank you so much. This is sorely needed that people have this understanding of what these executive orders are, but also I think we've uncovered some ways of how we can fight back on them as well. So thanks for being with us tonight.
Glad to do it, and thanks for the invitation.
Okay, so we hope to see all of you next month, and it will become a requirement now, from now on, that you cannot enter the session unless you bring somebody with you. So find somebody to sign up for the event when you get the registration link, and let's get them here. We want to double the numbers and get this movement moving again. So on that note, let's see, where will we go from here? We'll put this up and share it with you, I hope. I'm a little slow tonight, doing too many tasks. But again, thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you, Tim, for being with us tonight. And we do hope you will join us next month. So
Thank you, everyone, for your good questions.
And donate to NEIS.
And
yeah, that's a good idea. We don't mind.
Okay, thank you, David.
Okay, thanks.